Hmm.
We're ready.
Recording in progress.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Regularly scheduled meeting, regularly scheduled meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee for January 13th. I'm Lyle Baker, Chair of the meeting, and tonight we're joined by several members of the committee, the Vice Chair, Councilor Oliver from Ward 1, Councilor Stephen Allred from Ward 2, Councilor Rita Getz from Ward 5, Councilor Pam Wright from Ward 3, Councilor Vicky Danberg from Ward 6. All in the room and joining us remotely are members of the committee, Councilor David Kalis and Vice President of the Council from Ward 8, and also Councilor Josh Krensman by name, if not I'm sure he's there somewhere in the ether. There he is.
Here.
As well as members of the planning board and who are here. And I see that we've got my vision isn't quite as good as it should be. It looks like Mr. Doringer's here. And I don't know who else is here. Maybe his Dane is here. Anyone else from the planning board? Okay. But anyway, welcome all. And so we have a number of items to attend to tonight, but we want to begin with an appointment. This is the appointment. This is number 50124. The appointment of Christopher Pitt to the Planning and Development Board. Well, I neglected to mention, but I shouldn't. I'm not omitted. Ms. Norton, our able clerk, is making sure everything works right. Okay.
We have the chief.
Second.
We have Councilor Lucas too.
Oh, Councilor Lucas has joined us. Thank you. Is Mr. Pitt here? Oh, there he is. I'm sorry. Please come to the table. I was looking for you actually online. It never occurred to me that you actually be here. How wonderful.
I was told to come in person.
Wonderful. Good for you.
Were you told to stay the entire evening until all the items?
I've done so before. Online.
So this is, let me just read this into the record. This is Her Honor the Mayor appointing Christopher Pitt of 9 Honeywell Circle as an alternate member of the Planning and Development Board for a term of office to expire February 1st, 2027. So we have your background information, but the custom of the committee is to invite you to say a little about whether you're interested in this role and then respond to questions that the committee may pose.
Okay. Well, to start with my interest, it starts from just wanting to be part of local government. I've been living in Newton for about a little over 3 years now, and wanted to get involved. And after chatting with Barney, he recommended the Planning and Development Board. And after going to a couple of meetings, I found that I really enjoyed the work. I mean, you know, I didn't sort of talking or anything, but I enjoyed learning more about kind of the way that the city's planned and zoned. I enjoyed sort of seeing the challenges and seeing the solutions that are being posed and sort of being part of the process.
Okay. Questions from members of the committee? Councilor Albright.
I just have to say, I love the way you phrased the job. You went to meetings with the planning commission and the difficulty threading the needle of creating growth and preserving the character of the city of Newton and its villages. It sort of epitomizes the issue for us. And I mean, you got right in there and figured that out.
Well, it's that's something that I kind of encounter, where I live over in Newton Corner is full of historic buildings. There's, in a lot of ways, there's very little that you can do because there's a lot of historic buildings. And so kind of have to find these little ways to, you know, help with growth while still preserving blocks and blocks and blocks of buildings that, you know, you can't really change. And you don't want to change, you know, they're historic for a reason. So, you know, I see that sort of needle threading every day.
So it's great that you know where the problem lies and now you have to figure out how to solve it.
Hopefully I get to watch people solve it for a little bit before I have to throw my hat.
Yeah. Thank you for being willing to serve.
Yes, sir, Vice Chair, Ward One.
Thank you. So I'll start with thank you for raising your hand and being willing to serve, to support the city, right, with what's left of your free time. Kidding. But I am curious, with so many different ways to contribute to the city with your time and effort, how'd you end up with, start with perhaps planning?
Well, this isn't the first way. You find me in the basement sometimes. I work at the food bank. So this isn't really the first thing that I've done to try to help the city. But I've been in and out of government as a contractor, as a volunteer, as kind of all kinds of things. And so this is kind of where you can start to kind of, I guess, attack problems at the root rather than kind of be reactive. I guess this is where you can be proactive. It's with being reactive. You spend time with the food pantry and it's reactive work. You have people who are facing challenges and the way that you're dealing with it is by kind of helping them along. But the food bank isn't helping with homelessness, it isn't helping with financial strain. I mean, it helps with financial strain, it gives food, but it's not addressing the underlying issues of being at work or having issues with your pay. I see this as a way to be a little bit more proactive.
Great, thank you. That's all I have, Chuck.
Well, any other questions from anyone?
No.
Yes, Mr. Getz.
Thank you for volunteering, and I'm appreciative of your age. Just because I think that, especially if you're living here in Newton, it's wonderful that you know, chosen to step up and help. I do think that there's always like this steep learning curve, but you know, what you're doing as an alternate is a great way to get started, you know, and just being in the room and listening to the conversation is really helpful. Yeah.
That's how I see it.
Well, kudos and many thanks. Really.
Anyone else? If not, customary to entertain a motion from.
Well, seeing as how you're in Ward 1, sir, as am I'm happy to move approval.
Thank you very much. A motion to approve. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Okay. Thank you. You've received the vote of the committee. This is a suspenseful event, you know, the city council for a decision. I'd say your chances are pretty good. All right, thank you. You're welcome to stick around or you can go home and have some.
Can't we go?
Yeah.
What, you're delighted. And you've earned a piece of candy on the way.
The chocolate is going to keep me going for
This is the celery stick wrapped in peanut butter and chocolate.
By the way, the offer applies to the.
Yeah.
We're coming up for the candy.
We said the peanut gallery.
So welcome, Mr. Mellis here. We're going to talk now about item 3/1724. This is for honor the mayor requesting a discussion and possible amendments to retaining wall regulations for multifamily, commercial, industrial, civic buildings in section 5.4.2 of chapter Newton 30 zoning. This is an item we've heard before, and Ms. Kyrie's joined us too. Thank you. So do you want to lead us off here? Who's on deck? Okay, Mr. Lamel, thank you.
I will take this item everything was in the memo, but I have a couple slides just to put everything up there. And it has the language, so we can all be looking at the same thing.
That'd be great.
So cool. I'm gonna go right into it. Just because
Second.
Then is the third or the fourth discussion here, following a public hearing as well. So the issue at hand, right, is the council is looking to update the regulations for retaining walls, specifically within the Village Center Overlay District, VCOD, which is what is used to comply with state law. I think there seems to be clear agreement that one of the updates should include an allowance for below building or completely within building parking that requires retaining walls to facilitate that. And we've shown in various examples around the city and in other places that do that and are really very unobtrusive. What was asked of us is to find and explore stricter requirements when those retaining walls are being used to create surface parking, where those retaining walls might be a bit more obtrusive or much more visual than what we're talking about before. And moving back and forth, and there's two options that we want to share with the committee tonight. And I know, and it might come up, what's been going on with the MBTA Communities Law and what's going on with the legal case and the ruling. I think regardless of the state guidelines, regardless of that, I think staff believe that these are very much appropriate updates and will result in better design when it comes to the VCOD and will provide more oversight, I think, as you'll see too. So these are the two options that we want to put forward. Option one, relative to what we've been showing in the past, maintains the exception for retaining walls over 4 feet. They'd be allowed by right when they are allowing for parking within or below, entirely below within a building. Nothing's changed there. What is different is B2 here, which is that any retaining wall that's enabling access to surface parking would be subject to site plan review. So we think this is a really appropriate solution because it's going to provide that additional oversight. Site plan review has a public hearing requirement. Site plan review is fully compliant with state law. As we know, site plan review is okay in that regard. And so given the interest in control over walls over 4 feet, this means any wall over 4 feet used for surface parking is going to be seen and again have a public hearing. Option two, which is more in line with what was shown previously, is instead of the trigger for site plan review, it's the reduction of the special permit threshold. So we came to you last month where the special permit threshold was set at 10 feet. And that was after some conversations and back and forth with the state. We were asked to go back and see if that could be lowered. We put forward in those conversations with going down to 8 feet. So essentially a wall that's used for surface parking that is used to meet the minimum parking requirements between 4 and 8 feet would still be by right. So up to 8 feet would still be by right. Whereas the previous option one, it's site plan review. And then over 8 feet would trigger the special permit. So it's a 2-foot reduction in that special permit threshold. Those are the two options we were putting forward, before you all tonight. Again, we believe that option one is the better solution, providing more oversight, and we're looking forward to the conversation at hand.
I recognize people, just want to ask a clarification before you start. Option 1 and 2 are presented as alternatives. Is there a possibility of combining option 1 with option 2? In other words, site plan review up to 8 feet and special permit beyond? Or are they mutually exclusive? I just need to understand.
I think they could be combined. I think our recommendation cleanest to not.
I
but yes.
understand, I just need to understand procedurally. Okay, questions, Counselor Wright, and then Counselor Albright.
Site plan review, if, planning came back and so a developer wants to do a 8-foot tall retaining wall, and you guys come back saying, no, you can do it by 4 feet, you don't need 8 feet, is that binding?
By you guys, do you mean the planning board?
Okay, the planning board, it's the
Okay.
planning board's.
Yeah, it's not us.
Okay,
It's the
okay,
planning
yeah.
board.
So if the planning board comes back and says, no, you can do this with 4 feet, is that binding or no?
I would defer to law on that.
Ms. Wilson?
Did I hear my name get mentioned?
Yeah.
I'm having some trouble. The microphone's a little bit quiet. I've turned my sound up pretty high. Could you repeat the question?
Repeat the question. So, in option 1, it's saying, there's site plan review by the planning board. So let's say a developer comes in and say, I want an 8-foot retaining wall. I need that for my parking. But the planning board says, no, you can do it with 4 feet. You don't need 8 feet. Is that binding or not?
I would need to think about that and get back to you.
Well, what I would say is that, and we talked about this in the process, is that through site plan review, the body can condition a project. I think it would need to be rooted in a rationale. And I think there are elements of the site plan review process that involve, landscaping, topography, historic, there's all different, and I think if you could link the reasoning for a retaining wall reduction to those components, and I think show from an engineering perspective that it works and it is used to meet the minimum requirement, I would hope that would be a very strong argument that it is these are conditions that are binding.
But does our planning board have that expertise in engineering and architecturally and to make that finding? Because they're just volunteers that are appointed by the mayor.
So many members of our planning board have some expertise in planning or related aspects, but same as the city council, staff will provide guidance. So both from planning, engineering, whoever is relevant will provide guidance as we do on special permits.
So who in the city department would be responsible to say, yes, this retaining wall does not, or this retaining wall does not need to be 8 feet, but it should be 4 feet? Who can make that in the city departments?
I mean, it's not that different than the special permit. Because right now there's a special permit for anything over 4 feet. So the process really isn't any different than those. I don't know if there's one expert that you're relying on when reviewing retaining wall special permits that is giving you a definitive answer on what that height needs to be. I think it's similar that the burden is on the applicant to show that this is necessary.
Because right now with retaining walls, since we require a special permit over 4 feet, we're seeing a lot of retaining walls at 3 feet, 11 inches. And so I feel if we open it up taller, they're gonna go for the higher ones. And that will really affect neighbors. And usually then they'll put a 6-foot high fence on top of it. So if you're talking 8 feet retaining wall, then 6 feet is a 14-foot wall, in your backyard. So I'm not a supporter going above 4 feet, but that's where I am.
And I think Councilor Albright was next. I'd love, Councilor Getz, then come to Councilor Danbury.
So my initial question was sort of the same as Councilor Wright's, which is what authority does the planning board have to make decisions? But it goes beyond that. It's like in the second option, 8 feet is the maximum before you go to a special permit. And with the planning board's role, discretionary role with site plan review, there is no, they could come in with a 10-foot retaining wall or a 12-foot retaining wall and try and make the case that I need the parking space. The only way to do it is to get this retaining wall, and it could happen.
I mean, that's the same with the special permit. There's also no upper limit on what you can request by special permit.
Right.
So they could come today and ask for a special permit for a 10-foot, 12-foot retaining wall. So this wouldn't really be any different. It's just going to a different body.
It feels like there's less, for me, the first option, while you're having wonderful minds think about it and judge it, there's no upper limit. At least the other option has an upper limit of 8 feet before you go to a special permit.
So by upper limit, do you mean upper limit when it comes to the council? Because there's no upper limit on how tall of a wall you can ask for in
Right.
any of the options or today's ordinance. It's just when you trigger additional review. So this would go to the planning board as opposed to the city council, because that's what we're able to do and still be considered by right. But it's not any different as far as whether there's an upper limit you can request or not.
Did the planning board have this other option of site plan review when they had their meeting? Because their
No.
message to us doesn't include
No,
consideration of this.
We did not.
no, this was a recent idea.
Okay.
And again, so that in the site plan review process, there are certain criteria. Screening and loading, landscaping and topography, design. I think if you have a rational argument, and I think if you look at case law where site plan review and the conditions that are applied to them are upheld, I think when you can think of these if someone proposes a very large wall, there's a lot of these criteria that can be leaned on, and I think staff, planning, engineering would work to, just like they do for the special permit applications, to put forward information so that the planning board can make an informed decision, just like the land use committee does for special permits.
And I think similar to how it works today, as Councilor Wright pointed out, most developers are trying to stay under that limit that triggers any sort of additional action or public process. So I think this would encourage them to stay under that 4 feet. But give an option for those sites where there is some steeper topography, or you're preserving the existing house and have some constraints about where and how you add parking, would add a sort of discretionary review process for that.
I'm gonna go, that's the guy,
Yeah.
go to Danbury. I'm gonna recognize myself after you do that.
Fortuitously, I had a good conversation with someone in engineering today. And all of our issues are sort of intertwined right now. And I was looking at the 4749 case in terms of their retaining walls. And the one that's in the back, they stayed under 4 feet, just all the way around, so that they were out of, needing to seek a special permit, or, they stayed below the threshold, and it's like 3.5 feet, bumping up against the 4 feet. And it seemed as if, for me, so it was fortuitous that they actually, are going through right now, and they're maintaining the 4 feet. But the significant walls, there's one in the back that's at 3.5, and then the ones on the side follow the grade. But they are significant walls, they run the course, in terms of the sides. So I am wondering whether or not the language in here could be more instructive, as well as more that it is conditioned with the parking. That, these other retaining walls, because there are 3 series of retaining walls, 2 of the significant ones are on the sides, and then the one that only is relevant to the parking is in the back. So I would like to see it that it's actually, it only, these dimensional controls only pertain to anything that's associated with parking, period. So that there's no playing or gaming, the walls to increase the, the grade and hold grade in order to then, bury the basement.
So that wouldn't be relevant in the village center zone, because they bury the basement to get around FAR, and there's no FAR in the village center.
Right.
But I think if what you're proposing is to remove any allowance for retaining walls that are not providing parking, I think that's beyond what was proposed here.
Well,
And that will require going back to the state. I'm pretty confident that would not be accepted. If we don't allow any retaining walls, but that's,
no, I'm
Not
saying
the
up to
case.
4 feet.
well, that's what we allow today, is up to 4 feet.
Correct. Then I would want that to be maintained and.
Yes, that's the
period-
plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Between 4 and 8 would have to be directly associated with.
Yeah, that's how it's written.
Okay,
And only to provide the minimum number of parking stalls required, not even just for parking in general.
okay.
It's, these exemptions only relate to parking.
Well, it just doesn't read that way to me, you
Okay.
know, I need it stronger, you know, so that then it's understood that no wall over 8 feet or over 4 feet would be permissible unless it was associated with surface parking.
Okay, we could go back to the law department. They've helped us write this,
Mhm.
and we've reviewed with ISD to
Okay,
make sure it's clear, but maybe there's some more things we can do.
okay.
Okay, Councilor Deborah.
I actually had the same issue at the forefront. My concern was that I didn't think that the language was clear enough that you from 4 to 8 would only be allowed if it was associated with parking. And I think that the height of the retaining walls that are needed in order to get to underground parking are directly related to and determined by topography. So the only leeway that you have in there is if you're going underground, how high you want the ceiling in your basement. In other words, if you wanted an extra foot in your basement, then you have to go down another foot, and you need another foot on your retaining wall. But I agree that we need to tighten up this language a little bit and make it a little bit clearer.
So sorry, this is option 1, that is not limited between 4 and 8 feet. That's requiring site plan review anytime you're over 4 feet. Option 2 is the one that is fully by right between 4 and 8, which references only enabling access to surface parking.
Okay, but I'm okay with option 1, as it is with the language tightened up, because I think that, the language says to me that there is review with option 1 and there is review with option 2. It's just option 1, it's site plan review by the planning department, by ISD.
Planning board.
Or the planning board, rather. And option 2, special permit with the land use committee. So you get review regardless of which option.
Yeah, it would be the threshold at which that review kicked in.
Yeah.
So option 1 would kick in at 4 feet and just be site plan review. Option 2 would kick in at 8
At
feet
8 feet.
and be special permit.
I'm okay with option.
So, anybody else? If not,
Can I just clarify one thing?
Sure.
So in option 1, there is no, is there an upper limit with option 1?
There's no upper limit in any of the options or today's
No,
requirement.
but I mean, is there a limit at which site special permit kicks in with option 1?
In option 1, no, but to Councilor Chair Baker's point, you could have one. You could do both. You could have site plan review starting at 4 feet, and you could set special permit at 8.
At 8
I would feel more
Yeah.
comfortable with that.
I'm good with that too.
So that, you want,
Sorry, if you want to go last, then let me go first.
yeah, go ahead.
But I think I'm where I just heard, like, I prefer the and, not the or. And I am curious, like, because I just heard, I think I just heard you say something other than my understanding from the feedback that we've gotten from E EOHLC, which was can't have a special permit, this has to be by right. So I'm curious as to why, like, if the challenge is the special permit issue, why don't we just stop the language here and say such walls may not exceed 8 feet? Period.
So,
And if that's the case, why don't we just say 4 feet? Period.
well.
Because as my understanding was, and I wanted to just finish the
Yeah,
thought,
sure.
because I don't think it's the height. I don't think the concern was the height of said retaining wall. I don't think. It was the fact that we used the term special permit.
Not quite. The concern was the height. So the concern is that you can only build beyond a height by special permit. And they believe that that will push too many potential developments out of a by right option. So it's not that we use the word special permit, it's that we put any restrictions on the height of walls. So we can still require a special permit, we just need to allow a reasonable allowance for by right. And that's where we've been going back and forth on, is that 10 feet, is that 8 feet? Like, what is the magic number where enough can be built by right, based on the topography of the site and provide the required parking before triggering a special permit? It's not just the word special permit.
Okay. Sorry,
No, go ahead.
so, great. Then I want to come back to the, like, I do want to hear from law, because I think that was an outstanding question throughout this entire process of the VCOD. Is the planning board's, is the outcome of a site plan review binding? Do they have to abide? All throughout that entire process, the answer I always heard was no. Even if it is a strong logical recommendation, right, we can't make said developer
Right.
make a change.
So happy for law to correct, but I don't believe that's the case. It's that you can't deny the use. So, and in order to deny the project, you'd have to have very strong rationale and grounds. You can condition the project and you can add conditions focused on the site plan and some of the things, Mr. Lamel was pointing out. It's not a recommendation like administrative site plan review. When we review religious or educational institutions, we make a recommendation to ISD. This is different. The planning board is a decision maker. They're issuing an, approval that could have conditions. But
So it's placing, so I think I get the distinction here. Yeah, it's not saying no to the project. It's saying you have to modify it because of this particular issue with parking and the retaining wall height and or location, I would imagine in some cases. All right. I'm
Can I
gonna do
just
that.
add clarification there?
Yes.
My memory, and it's a while, but law department can correct me. There's an old case of Prudential versus Westwood, if my memory is right, which basically says that a binding site plan review can condition so long as it doesn't make the use impossible. I mean, it can't be a backdoor way of denying the use. So, but if the use is otherwise, and that's where there is a point where a developer could say, but for this retaining wall, I can't do my project. And that's a conversation that could end up in litigation. But the point is that that's my memory. Is that consistent with your understanding? But anyway, that.
Can I just add that I had a conversation with the Watertown Planning Director in another context about site plan review. And he said that he uses site plan review all the time, and which puts mandatory conditions on.
Sure, and I've heard him say the same thing, like I've attended a few of their meetings of it, and great, unfortunately, we're not in Watertown. So I wanna know. what
No,
we're
it's
thinking.
state law.
Yeah,
State
well,
law.
it is, but
Yeah, no.
things are different between Newton and Watertown. And cities and towns everywhere. But my other question then is, I just want to make sure, because I didn't hear it this way before. So the challenge is really the height of retaining walls being reasonable. But the difference between our version of reasonable and the state's is basically without having looked at the lots that we're talking about. Is that a fair, because it's like, I feel like now we're getting back into that. Yes, but we don't think 4 is right. We think, and it used to be 10, now it's 8. But I don't understand, like, there hasn't been any review that took place, right, that I missed? Because I did also notice on one of the slides, there was a letter that I might have missed.
The same conditional compliance letter.
Oh, okay, so it was the same thing we got
In October.
October 10th or whatever that was. Okay, all right. Is that, so is what I'm saying at least reasonably close to factual?
I don't think the state has looked at a lot by lot in Newton
Okay,
analysis.
all right.
I don't.
Well, and I think that's why we propose the site plan review alternatively, because there isn't a magic number. And it's kind of a back and forth with the state and sort of like, well, does that seem reasonable, that will allow for enough development? And I think our idea of what's a reasonable retaining wall and the state's may be different, right? Like, we're thinking, what is reasonable for the abutters to be looking at? They're thinking, what will reasonably allow these sites to be developed, to provide housing? So it's slightly different perspectives, which is why it's sort of tough to find what is that right number. Feel pretty confident in 8 feet, but if you don't want to set a hard and fast number like that, could do the site plan review at 4 feet.
Understood. You're gonna have a lot of fun on the planning board, my friend.
You still have time, right? You have to go to full status, right? I see Counselor Christman has his hand up, and then I'll go back to Counselor Wright.
Oh, Ms. Wilson has her hand up too. I don't know if she wants to answer a question.
Ms. Wilson, did you?
Respond to Counselor Oliver's first question. My internet was going in and out, so I didn't want to jump in. But I want to apologize. I don't have little to none experience with the planning board and its authority. I am trying to get in touch with Attorney Lee to see if he can give us a definitive answer to your question. So I apologize. I'm not able to give the law department's response to that at this time, but if I hear back from him and can give you a response, I'll let you know.
Okay, well, did you hear my explanation about Prudential?
Yes, and I will look into that and take a look.
Yeah. Thank you. Counselor Christman, and then I'll come back into the committee in the room.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I read through the letter from the state, and I didn't see any reference to parking specifically. So I'm curious. I guess it's a question for maybe Zach and Jen, where the sort of parking came into this, and how much of this problem is alleviated if we were to actually eliminate the parking requirements in the VCOD districts.
It would be fully alleviated by removing the parking requirement.
And so, and where the parking came in was a compromise. So the state's initial letter and their preference is we remove that requirement for a special permit over 4 feet completely, full stop. Where we've been able to get is that the real concern is when you need retaining walls to provide parking, particularly the sort of tuck under parking or underground parking. So where we've managed to get, working closely with the state, is that could we provide an exemption just related to parking rather than a sort of wholesale exemption, which is their preference. It's just
Gotcha.
the special permit allow any height retaining wall for any reason.
And if we were to eliminate the parking requirement, then that eliminates the need for an exemption.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the exemption still makes sense, particularly for the larger multifamily buildings where we know they'll provide parking. It's usually underground, and it's hard to avoid some sort of retaining wall over 4 feet as you get to the entrance to that underground garage. So I don't think it's realistic see larger projects with 0 parking spaces, even though there are some areas where you could do it.
So I agree with that. I think we're likely to see parking, especially in the larger projects. I think the question for us is, at least in my mind, the question is, would I rather regulate retaining walls or require parking? To my mind, that's sort of a no-brainer. I think we've all seen the offensive retaining walls around the city on a number of projects. And given the fact that like I think many of my colleagues, believe that we're likely to see parking built regardless of whether we require it, I would rather see this committee eliminate the parking requirement included in the BCOD and allow us to continue regulating the retaining walls. So that's the direction I'd head. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I say a word? And then I'll come back to you. I appreciate Councilor Kretzmann's point of view, which is extraordinarily consistent over time, which is you would rather see no parking requirement anywhere. I'm happy with the compromise with the and, if that's possible. The one other dimension of it, though, that you mentioned about site plan review for institutional uses that I think might add a little more safeguard is that when the application is filed, I know that the process involves the planning board and they have a public hearing, but I think notice to the ward councilor would be useful, just like we do for the case of the institutional uses. That way, someone on the council is apprised of the situation right away and is in the loop. And I think that's been helpful even in the advisory matters that I've dealt with over the years. So if that's not inconsistent with the opportunity we have, I would like to see that added in. But let me go to Councilor Wright.
I just want to I'm fine with retaining walls, however high they need to be for underground parking, because that's something we want to promote. But I'm not comfortable going over 4 feet, and I'll probably be voting no on this. Just because on Chase is pretty steep, and they're making it work at 4 feet or 3.5 feet. But if you give them, okay, 6 feet, 8 feet or whatever, they probably do that. And that's, you know, how many retaining walls do we have out there that's over 4 feet? You know, that they needed for parking or something versus just leveling the lot. That would be interesting to know, but I can't think I don't go to all the land use, well, Tariq's up there. But how many land use are requiring that high of retaining walls? And the only place I see it in the village centers requiring a high retaining wall would be in West Newton along Cheesecake Brook. But in general, our village centers are pretty flat. And they probably can do it with under 4 feet, if at all. Where you're going to need these retaining walls are in the neighborhoods. And that's abutting people's property. And so the 8 foot with the 6 foot fence is 14 feet, you know, overlooking your backyard. And if it's on the south side of you, that's, you know, a lot of shade.
That raises a question I have, and I want to follow up if I can. Do you mind if I just ask?
Oh, go ahead.
Councilor Wright has raised the point, which is the abutter of the lot that's in the that's not part of the BCOD, but maybe the boundary lot. Is that?
No, they could be in VCOD, but they're not the one that's putting in the retaining walls, the neighboring lots.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to understand if you're not.
And how many people, how many residents have we heard from that like retaining walls next to them?
Okay. Yeah. Mr. Lemon.
I would just say that I would very much think, and you can do your own research and speak to developers, that just like developers are not looking to trigger a special permit and go through the process, the kind of looming potential of site plan review, and I think the planning board is incredibly able-bodied, the time, the money, the effort that would go into that would push a project into a void going in for site plan review, just as they would. So
Unless they really need it.
Unless they absolutely need it. Exactly. I think they're going to look to design. And again, this committee, the council removed the largest impetus and incentive for using retaining walls, which is height piece, and the retaining walls, high basements, high square footage, that doesn't count, and that's gone away. So,
And there's no FAR, so you're not trying to do the basement trick to get around FAR. It's not a factor.
I do recognize Counselor Kalis, I think, is that, am I seeing, is that,
Tariq.
Tariq.
oh, Counselor Lucas, I'm sorry. I can't see far enough, if you give me a.
Well, this is the first. I got confused with Counselor Kalis.
No, it's not, it's Chair's confusion, not you.
I have the better background. I just want to respond to Counselor Wright, because she mentioned something about retaining walls and land use, if I heard that correctly. We haven't had many of those requests this year in land use. I think we've had 2. One was in Ward 8, near the school. I'm drawing a blank. Countryside School. And then we had 1 retaining wall request in Upper Falls that was around 8.5 feet. But again, that's Upper Falls, which is a very unique village and landscape and layout and all that stuff. But we've only had 2, so just want to share that with the committee. Thank you.
Okay, Counselor Albright, Counselor Getz.
So does this rule apply to underground parking retaining walls?
there's a separate, I can share the.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure it doesn't.
the
Separate
language.
exemption for underground or within the
Yes,
building.
Yeah.
Right, so there's 2, is essentially retaining walls over 4 feet anywhere require special permit. Except there's 2 exceptions. One is when it's providing for underground or within the building parking, which again, I think seems there's consensus to do that regardless. And the second is E2, which is the question of, do you, anything over 4 feet for surface parking, is site plan review? Or option 2, as we propose, I know there's the dual combining option, but between 4 and 8 feet for surface parking would be fully by right. And then above 8 feet is triggering special permit.
Was your point about site plan review that they will try to avoid site plan review and therefore they won't be asking for larger than 4 feet?
Unless they absolutely need it.
Yeah, generally when we speak with developers, they're looking, if there's a fully by right pathway that avoids a public process, that brings in unknown, adds time, the risk of not knowing what sort of conditions or things like that may be put on, they will avoid it. So you're not gonna build an 8-foot wall, just to build an 8-foot wall with rigorous site plan review. But if you do have a steeper site or there's unique conditions, then that at least gives you a pathway.
So you think site plan review is more of a deterrent to large?
Any additional review is a deterrent.
And site plan review will bring us into compliance
Okay,
with the state.
okay.
Whereas just putting a special permit at 4 feet is started all those.
Counselor Getz, then go back to Counselor
Yeah.
Denver.
Going back to 47, 49, Chase, the actual walls that are being parallel to the street are, within a foot of the lot line. So there's no mention, in terms of where the lot, these retaining walls are located, in this provision. So that's another concern that, Council Wright brought up in terms of the back of the lot and then the, abutting an abutter. That's the significance of this height of the wall being so close to the lot line. So I don't know whether or not that's something we want to regulate right now.
We don't regulate it anywhere else. So I think if we were to add more regulations on retaining walls just in the BCOD, where we have to allow for by right development, that will cause problems. Because anywhere else in the city, there's no limitations on where the wall is located.
Right.
We started there where we only regulated walls within the setback. And then expanded that because people were doing it just outside the setback. And could go as tall as they wanted if they just stayed outside the setback. You could do 12 feet by right, you could do 20 feet by right. So,
In the case of the Great Wall of Court, Newton Corner.
so we don't regulate that anywhere else. So I think in order to come into compliance with MBTA communities, we need to remove restrictions. I think adding new ones would be problematic.
Okay.
And then I don't know whether or not we want to speak about it now, but just even in terms of where we are. This is being controlled by the HAA, the AHA, correct? The Affordable Housing Act. I just, I'm concerned about, whether or not we're needing to address this by the 2nd or whatever the date was in February.
Oh, no, this is unrelated.
It's unrelated. This
Yeah.
doesn't relate to the,
These are not the.
that's the next item.
That's ADUs.
That's
Okay,
ADU.
yeah, no, but where is this? Now I'm getting really.
This is from the
confused.
MBTA Communities Act.
This
Right.
is
So
left over.
now I'm really sort of wondering, because they're saying their regulations or their guidelines are unenforceable, correct?
Only because we did a bad procedure.
Yeah, so they have to just do the procedure
So,
again.
but we need to go through that process. We need to
Well,
have public hearings and we need
the-
to,
Not a public,
No,
No.
okay.
let me clarify what I understand, and the planning, a lot of departments can clarify what's really going on.
Afraid to open up this can of worms.
The MBTA Communities Act was challenged by
Right.
Town of Milton, and the Supreme Judicial Court said the act itself is valid. The Attorney General has enforcement authority under the act. The guidelines that were issued, however, were not done in accordance with the Administrative Procedure Act, because and candidly, that's an issue that's been out there a long time, because they called them guidelines, and yet they treated them as if they were regulations.
yes.
We treated them as if they were regulations for purposes of compliance. And so when we did all of the work in committee before, and ultimately it resulted in the amendments to the ordinance, we complied with the then guidelines. So this is assuming that those guidelines would be replicated again in the form of a regulation in due course, and in all of the cases, because I assume that one of the efforts that's going to go on in the drafting of the regulations is to say those communities who complied with the former guidelines will not be now out of compliance with the regulations that come forward. But I do think the thrust of what I'm hearing from the state and the, notwithstanding the case, but also our planning department, is that we've got to finish up this last detail in order to be in compliance with what were then the guidelines, but will be the regulations. And might as well do it now and save a lot of trouble.
Correct, but I don't know that we're under that February.
Now, that
No,
doesn't
we
have
never
anything to do with
were,
it.
we never were for this.
And
That's a different-
that's a date that doesn't apply to this case, as I understand.
Yeah.
And if
You
I'm,
should be a law professor.
let me know.
You should be a law professor.
All right, all right. Wait a minute, I do have Counselor Danberg, and I'll come back to you if you don't mind. Counselor Danberg?
Okay, just to comment in regards to the reduction from 10 to 8 feet. And I was trying to think through the villages where we might run into a problem there that would put a lot of people, throw a lot of people into the site plan review. In Newton Center, we have Ripley Street, which backs up to the Andover Newton Hill. But I think that 8 feet, since all of those houses are redevelopment and not, there's no raw land there that would be having to cut into the hill. The existing homes all have retaining walls, and they're probably, I think 8 feet would do it for that entire street. The other village that we have is Upper Falls, look,
Yeah.
Upper Falls, yes.
But that's not the VCOD.
But that's not in VCOD, that's right, yeah.
I think to your point about Ripley Street is a perfect example of where the applicant would come in.
not coming out. Come on.
Would state their case, right? And
Yeah.
I think you would use context, you would, and whoever either the planning board or the city council would look and make the determination.
Yeah, every house on that street, it backs up to the hill and goes into the hill. And in order to get into a driveway, they have to have a significant retaining wall there.
So, Counselor Wright, and then I want to see if we can get some closure on this item and go forward.
But in that case, in that example, the retaining wall is digging in and down.
That's
So-
right, it's not gonna bother the neighbor.
It's not
Yeah.
going about, and then I have no problems, you
Yeah.
want a 10-foot retaining wall, as long as it's
What-
not.
Whatever they
bothering the
need
neighbors.
reasonably, and it's not gonna bother the neighbor.
Yeah.
Um, Councilor Getz?
Well, this, and then we're talking about when you're talking about Upper Falls, it's Route 9, and it's the working down to Route 9, because there's quite a few properties that have retaining walls in Upper Falls. And, but in Route 9 area as well. So, and that's a lot of MRT there.
Okay, so let me just summarize where I think we are in the item, which is that I heard some sentiment around the table without a formal motion to have the two proposals combined. And I didn't hear dissent from the idea of notifying the ward councilor in the process. But if that fairly states where the sense of the committee is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Okay, oh, I have a hand up, I'm sorry. Councilor Kretzmann.
Well, I would just love to see if I could get a sense of the committee about just eliminating the parking requirement, because I feel like we're getting really silly here. No, I'm serious. We spent a lot of time regulating retaining walls. We were very thoughtful about it. We went back and forth a number of times, and we're about to eliminate all that in the VCOD just because we want to require parking, which to me seems silly. It seems like foolish policy that we're just complicating and compounding our error to come up with a compromise something, which we don't need to do. So I'd love to see if we could just get a sense of the committee about eliminating the parking requirement before we talk about combining versions 1 and 2 or going with 2 over. It's just unnecessary.
Councilor Wright, and then I'll come back to that question, okay?
My
Oh,
huge,
Councilor Kalis, I'm sorry, I haven't heard from him. If you don't mind, let me
Okay, yeah.
recognize Councilor Kalis. Councilor
Yeah,
Kalis?
thank you. I just wanted to, I mean, to what Councilor Krinsman was saying, I would support that, what he's talking about. So that's my feeling.
Councilor Wright.
That's it.
I'm a big no on it just because we're putting up to vote the overnight parking ban. And if we eliminate that and they don't build enough parking, we'll become a Brighton and our streets are narrow and we're gonna have to put up a zillion signs and parking on one side and this and that. I think it just opens a huge can of worms. We just don't know what's gonna be happening by next election.
So, let me just, as a procedural matter, I just want to get clear that, but for the parking question that Councilor Kretzmann raised, seconded in a sense by Councilor Kalis, was there a sense in the committee that this is a proposal that is worth putting forward? Now, we're going to talk about the parking thing separately, but I just want to, okay? Any dissent from that other than the question of parking? Now, the combination.
So the only troubling thing that I heard, which was, I thought an interesting remark from Councilor Wright about, well, if it's in the back, I don't care how, as long as it doesn't bother the neighbors.
Well, I think it's
So
a
maybe
question
we
of whether
shouldn't be
it's.
putting a cap on it to send a special permit. Maybe we should just send it to site plan review and let it go. Let them use their best judgment.
We could go backwards, but I thought we were getting somewhere, but never mind.
I thought
Let me just take a sense of the committee about eliminating the parking. I don't think that's within the scope of this item at the moment. It's a sort of a foundational issue, and I'm not sure that we really advertised that question at this point, because it is part of the BCAV and it is part of what we now have. We're just trying to make what we now have work. So I wouldn't be willing to personally entertain that, but I do want to honor Councilor Krinsman's comment. Anybody else want to entertain it?
What, entertain it?
No, not entertain it? Or
Not entertain.
not entertain. Anybody else? So Councilor Krinsman, I think you have two of the committee who've been interested, but not yet enough to bring it forward. So I'm going to, if I can, just frame a motion that we recommend to the council a compromise, not compromise, a combined version in which you would have site plan review by the planning board up to 8 feet, and then special permit beyond with also notice to the ward councilor. Is that fair? Okay. Is there a second? Don't require one, but just, okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, I want to understand what you're saying, that becomes the motion that we are now about to vote.
Yes.
Then I will second it and I support it.
Okay. So let me try again. Is everybody clear on what It's basically combining what the planning department is proposal 1 and 2, right? With the addition of just notice to the ward council. And that would be the vehicle by which we would respond to the state's concern, and apparently we would satisfy the state, as I hear it, right?
We believe
And
so,
we believe so. At least that's the understanding of the planning department.
best of our knowledge.
Councilor Jones.
Yeah, the only caveat that I have is understanding how the planning and development board conditions through their review, their site plan review, because I want to make sure, as you suggested, that in fact they can, and it is a valid, conditioning.
I think they can condition, again, the question, is my understanding is, when the condition basically swallows the use. You say, I can't do this but for this. Then you get into a conversation where the planning board might have to yield, because it has to be as of right. It can't be an absolute turn down.
So what we have written in the ordinance is that the planning board may impose reasonable conditions at the expense of the applicant to ensure compliance with their findings and the standards for granting site plan review. Conditions must have a rational nexus to potential impacts of the proposed development and be roughly proportional, both in nature and extent, to the impacts of the proposed development. And then we have my different criteria for when they may reject an application. But they're issuing a decision that then the development is held to.
I mean, the developer could come back and say, I challenge that, and
Yeah,
say the
okay.
condition's unreasonable.
Right.
That's entirely possible, but they at least have, on the face of it, the capacity to issue a condition that would be binding, right?
Correct.
Was that, okay? It may not stick if somebody challenges it, just like any of our special permit conditions could be done.
Right,
Yeah.
no, I like the upper limit of P.
Okay.
And
Okay.
yeah, I just want to clarify. I'm okay with the motion being the and, not the or, right? Like we've talked about with the addition of the, notification to the ward council. Makes all the sense in the world. I do want to make sure though that, and perhaps this is in subsequent, when we voted up or down, I'd like to add on the subsequent to second call so that legal has the opportunity to validate everything we just said.
Okay.
Because to me, that's central to my vote.
Okay, well, let's do this. Let's see if we can vote it, and then we'd ask the law department if there's any concern. They advise the clerk and the chair and the vice chair prior to the next meeting, because I'll actually be out of town. I'll have to zoom in and hope that it works. So we can put it on second call if necessary. Now, somebody may put it on second call independently, but I'd rather not automatically go to second call if we don't have to. So unless there's a reason to be concerned about the legality of what we are voting in terms of its enforceability, then I would assume that we could send it to the council and it could pass on first call if that was the will of the council.
Fair enough.
Fair enough? Okay, so with that, let me see, all those in favor of the motion? All right. Opposed?
Aye.
One opposed, abstentions?
Abstain.
Two abstentions?
Three.
Three, okay. So we have four?
413.
413, that's enough to pass the item and send it forward. Okay? Now, this is gonna put a little burden on the department and law department to do your homework before next Monday. Well, actually Tuesday, because of the holiday. Right, but for the packet, obviously, we'd like to have a clean version. All right?
Problem.
Okay. So, thank you very much. Now, the next item, we've got two other, we're coming back to the VCOD for conversation at the end, but in the meantime, this is an item we deferred from last time, 36924, requesting discussion and amendments to accessory dwelling unit ordinance. Our honor the mayor requesting discussion and amendments to Newton's accessory dwelling unit ordinance so it complies with the state zoning act. Now, I'm gonna ask the department to make a presentation of what it recommends. Let me just say a word about the process here for a minute. We have, I think all of you know that because of the Milton case, the the state was going to, had finished, I think, the comment period and the regulation on was Friday. And they were going to do the regulations on fast track. I don't know whether that track is moving very quickly, but my hope, and I'll just say about calendaring, is to move what we have to do for the state process forward expeditiously, so that that's in place before the law, as close as possible to when the law affects, because the statute, I've got a copy of the statute for everybody just to have one, but the effective date is coming up, and I don't think it's a wise idea to have an ordinance in limbo if we can. That doesn't mean that there may be other opportunities, but I do think that we want to do at least what we need to do as a minimum matter. And I've talked with Ms. Norton about the possibility of setting a public hearing for the second week in February. The reason I'm thinking about that as a possibility is that we have in our committee the whole question of how we're responding to the demolition problem, the tear downs. We've got Utile coming back next time and then coming back again. And I'm looking at the second meeting in March as a public hearing on whatever that comes out of that conversation. Because I really do not want to go into the budget without having addressed that issue, which has been before us for weeks and weeks. So it's ultimately we can the will of the committee how you want to proceed, but at least I think we ought to move something forward. And there is an opportunity, obviously, if the people want to do other things to the ordinance, we can do that. Maybe we can do it then, or maybe we do it later, but certainly I don't want to hold up the minimum amount that we need to do in order to comply with the law. So that's just my preference, but we'll see where we go. But with that background, let me just ask the department if they want to make their presentation at this point. And who's doing this one?
This one is me.
Okay, Ms. Parra.
Thank you.
And can you just pass the water down the paint can? I think it's the one I
This
started
one?
with. Yeah.
So this is sort of our best understanding of the current regulations. So as the chair said, they're still in draft form, and we're not expecting final regulations until right around February 2nd, which is when it will actually go into effect. So we agree, we'd like to have our ordinance up to date as close to that as possible to limit confusion. However, the regulations and the statute will go into effect on February 2nd, regardless.
It's just a copy of the statute, so everybody.
Yeah.
That's all.
So, Stephanie, go
Do you have
to
any more?
It's confusing. because
Okay.
it's like,
So first, I'm just gonna give a little bit of background about ADUs in Newton. So they've been allowed since 1987, and there's been pretty regular updates since then. There's been a couple of major updates, but pretty consistently every few years, there seems to have been updates to the ADUs or accessory apartment ordinance. So there's a major update in 2017, and this was to first allow internal ADUs by right that were less than 1,000 square feet. At the time, detached ADUs were still only by special permit unless they're in a historic carriage house outside of a historic district. The 2017 amendment did a few other things, removed minimum lot area requirements and removed parking requirements. In 2022, the city council updated again to allow detached ADUs up to 900 square feet by right, and a slight reduction in setbacks in certain circumstances. And I'll show a little more detail about that as we go. So Newton's actually been ahead of things when it comes to ADUs, at least in the region. We do not have that much that needs to be substantially updated as part of this new state law. So even given all of that we've been somewhat permissive compared to surrounding towns and communities in ADUs, we still don't have that many. We have about 121, it might be 122 now. And that has averaged about 10 per year since 2014. And if you exclude 2-unit condos, which would make this number even lower, 0.6% of the single and 2-family homes in Newton have an ADU. So it hasn't been a very popular option for adding housing, which I think is why every few years the city council has revisited this and made some amendments trying to make this a bit more attractive. Most ADUs are internal, so they're part of the principal dwelling. About a quarter of them are detached, and most of those have been in historic carriage houses. So the changes to state law, the Affordable Homes Act, which was passed last summer, made changes to Chapter 40A, which is the State Zoning Act, requiring that ADUs be allowed by right in all single family, anywhere that allows for single family residential. As I said, these changes go into effect on February 2nd. The state issued draft regulations back in December. And the comment period on those just ended, and they had been saying that they would finalize them by the February 2nd deadline when this goes into effect. And one of the main changes, at least for us, is that ADUs may no longer be subject to owner occupancy requirements. There's also language about the design and dimensional standards not being unreasonable. And that's where the draft regulations have provided a bit more detail as to what that actually means. So for us, the main change, removing the owner occupancy requirement. Additional changes are aligning setbacks and height to single family home regulations, at least per the draft regulations. Some small changes in how we define floor area versus habitable space for the principal dwelling and determining the max size for the ADU, and then some small design restrictions that need to be removed. So even if we don't pass the ordinance, this will go into effect February 2nd. Again, we recommend as soon as we can having our ordinance come into alignment with state law just to limit confusion. But either way, this will be in effect February 2nd. Required amendments. So the amendments we're requiring are just what's needed to comply with state law. I know there may be interest in going beyond that and doing more to further incentivize ADUs. These amendments are limited to coming into compliance with at least our understanding of the law and the draft regulations. So just to start, where are ADUs allowed? Our current ordinance allows them accessory to any single family or two family building, and that's regardless of district, because we do have a lot of non-conforming homes that are in districts that wouldn't otherwise allow single family. The state law requires that we allow it accessory to any residential use in any district that allows for single family residential. This gets a little confusing in the draft regulations, and this is one area where we want to see the final regulations. The way we have it written right now is we kept the accessory to single family or two family buildings and added on accessory to a residential use in a single family or a single residence district. This needs a little more clarification from the state in the final regulations. Either way, I don't think it's a major change for us because we already allow it anywhere there is a single family building.
Just a point, you want to go through it or just?
Just a
point of
quick
clarification?
question. What about business districts? Because there's single and two families in business.
We've
districts.
always allowed that.
Yeah.
And we're not proposing any change to that.
But it doesn't seem to be written that way. That's what,
Well, wait a minute. Let's.
I mean, it's the same issue.
Our ordinance or the state?
Our ordinance. doesn't
Our
seem-
ordinance is written that way.
Yeah.
So it's accessory to a single family, detached or two family building.
It's the
Building or
building
district?
and then the
Building.
district.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm assuming that what the slide you've got here, the bolded is the addition from the state and what
Yeah,
is
the
in regular
bold is the
current.
change. And so we would add on to what we have. It probably wouldn't really expand the allowance. Maybe if you had some sort of non-conforming residential use in a single residence district, now it could have an ADU, but it's pretty limited because we already allow it anywhere there is a single family or two family building. It's just the state law was written slightly differently. And so we're still trying to rectify the two. And so the maximum size for an ADU, again, here, still relatively minor changes. Currently, our ordinance allows, for internal undetached ADUs, the by right allowance is measured based on either the size of the principal dwelling, a percentage of the size of the principal dwelling, or sort of an upper limit to what can be built by right. So currently for internal, we allow it to be 33% of the total habitable space of the principal dwelling, or 1,000 square feet, whichever is less. So you can't ever build more than 1,000 square feet by right. You need at least a 3,000 square foot house to do to max out your by right. Special permit threshold is written as 40% of the total habitable space, or 1,200 square feet, again, whichever is less. For the proposed amendments, we have to change it the way the state defined it to at least 50% of the total gross floor area. So this is a little bit different than total habitable space. Gross floor area will grab a bit of additional area that's maybe not conditioned today, that wouldn't count as habitable space, but not a major change. And still the max being 1,000 square feet. So the difference here really happens in the 2,000 to 3,000 square foot home range. So under our existing rules, to max out that 1,000 square foot for your internal ADU, you need at least a 3,000 square foot home. This change won't change anything for homes that are bigger than 3,000 square feet, because your by right max is still 1,000. But it means now a 2,000 square foot home could max out the ADU size. And then special permit, we simplified this to just an upper limit of 1,200 square feet, because when we had to change 33% to 50% of gross floor area, it didn't make sense to have the special permit limit be 40%, so it'd be less than that. And it matches the detached ADU, which didn't tie the special permit upper threshold to the principal dwelling size. It just had a flat maximum size. So those are the changes for size for internal. For detached, we were already matching the numbers. So the only change is to go from habitable space to gross floor area for a detached ADU. Otherwise, it will be the same.
There is one wrinkle that I understand from the building commissioner, which is that the state definition and the regulations goes from inner wall to inner wall. Our definition goes from the inside of the outer wall, if you can understand that.
What's the year?
Yeah, I think the state's using the old building code
Yeah,
definition.
Yes, from 2008, I understand.
Yes,
And the new building code uses our definition, and I don't know why they're,
I don't know either. I also don't know if that's something that will get,
it's not gonna make a big difference to
Verified
us
in the
one way or the
final,
other.
yeah.
It's just, I just wanna point out, I actually put a comment in personally as saying,
Yeah.
why don't you let us use habitable space, which we've used, or if you do, use the
or just.
the
not.
building code, whatever version is the current building code, rather than the old building code. I mean,
We
that doesn't
were
make any sense.
to define gross floor area because we figured it would default to the building code definition.
Yeah.
So we were a little surprised when then they defined it on their own, which
And-
seems like you're just creating the potential for confusion.
Yeah, and my guess is that piece will get fixed.
I hope so.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
this
just
is-
clarification.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, because I get very confused here where I'm sort of thinking about how we define gross floor area and whether or not, who rules, whether or not it's their definition
Their
or whether or
definition.
not ours. So then that just switches everything, just because we then will have to capture all the basements and all the attics, because that's in their definition.
Yeah, so it captures some space that we wouldn't otherwise, because what we don't currently define it as floor area, we define it as habitable space.
Right.
Um,
But now if we have to use gross floor
we have to
area,
use their
We have to
definition.
we have to use their definition.
Yeah,
Have to use
it's not a big difference. And again, these are only affecting, these changes really only affecting those homes less than 3,000 square feet that are adding an ADU, because
Right.
beyond that, you're still capped at the 1,000. It doesn't really matter how big the principal dwelling is, you can still only do 1,000.
But that 1,000 now includes the basement, which we didn't before,
What
in
do you
our
mean?
definition.
Oh,
Because
it's
they're
that-
only allow 1,000 square feet, and that includes the basement and attic.
But if you, excuse me, if I clarify what I think I've heard, is 1,000 square feet is what the unit can be.
Yeah,
The measuring space may include the basement or not, doesn't matter. It's the size of the unit.
and you still have to meet FAR. We think you still have to meet FAR requirements. So you don't get it around that.
But if you do a detached in your backyard and you put in the basement, now that basement is included in the 1,200 or whatever we have now, square, or 900 square feet
Yeah.
by right, and before we didn't include it.
I don't think so, because that would, I believe, and we can clarify this both with law and the commissioner of ISD, is this number here, the gross floor area, is referring to the principal dwelling, and that's to set your maximum size for your ADU. It's not controlling what counts as FAR for the ADU. The ADU and the principal dwelling will still have to comply with FAR. But that 1,000 square feet or 900 square feet, I don't know that we were counting basement before. I don't know that anyone's ever done a detached ADU with a basement.
But you just never know, you know, but the thing is, it's not very clear.
I don't disagree.
And for instance, if you have an
Let me
ADU,
just
that-
recognize you,
thank you,
Councilor Danvers. Yeah.
thank you. If you have an ADU that includes storage space in the basement, if you already have to include the basement, then that basement is gonna have to be carved, that storage space would have to be carved out of your 1,000 square feet.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And we don't want that, I don't think.
Well, but that's what the state tells us.
But I don't think that is what they're telling us. I think it's all in just how you, whether you're using the percentage or the 1,000 square feet is based on the size of the principal dwelling. And in,
The basement of the ADU.
no, it's looking at the principal dwelling, and I think the basement does count under gross floor area so if you had a home that was 2,000 square feet above ground and 1,000 square foot basement, I think you would count the full 3,000 square feet in determining how big your ADU can be. I don't think it has anything to do with the definition of FAR when it comes to the ADU. But again, we can clarify all this, and we are hoping things get a little clearer with the final regulations. But it really isn't a big change, and it's really only impacting those homes that are less than 3,000 square feet.
Why don't we carry on just to get through this?
Okay, so setbacks and heights. So this is another area where we believe we need to make some changes, which this really only applies to a detached ADU because the internal are part of the existing house, which if it's being constructed new, would have to comply with all of the single family regulations, or if it's existing, it's just existing. So currently, we tie ADUs to for the most part, our accessory building requirements, which limits them to a max height of 1.5 stories or 22 feet, and has a max footprint of 700 square feet. Garages and accessory buildings have this max footprint of 700 square feet. Garages can waive this by special permit. Accessory buildings, meaning also ADUs, cannot. There's no avenue for a larger footprint unless you're going into a historic carriage house, which is exempt from these requirements. This has actually long been a problem. It's because it makes it harder to do 1 story. You also can't max out the 1,500 square foot special permit ADU for a detached with a 700 square foot footprint and 1.5 stories. So this is in conflict with the state laws. We do need to remove the footprint. Where things get a little trickier is with the setbacks. Currently, our ordinance, and this was from the 2022 update, allowed for some reduction in setbacks. Accessory buildings and garages only have 5-foot side and rear setbacks. However, ADUs had to meet principal setback, except if waived by special permit. In the 2022 update, the council reduced those to be half the principal building setback or 7.5 feet, whichever is greater. So you're always providing at least 7.5 foot setbacks, which are our side setbacks for old lots and, you know, many of our residential districts. I don't think we've seen this used yet, but, you know, this was meant to make it a little bit easier, but not to go all the way down to accessory building setback. So the draft regulations require us to not regulate ADUs, not make it more restrictive for an ADU than a single family home. So that means we need to allow the full height of a single family home, which is, you know, typically 2.5 stories. The way we propose this in the draft is that you are not eligible for these reduced side and rear setbacks if you're building to the full 2.5 stories. So if the ADU is limited to a max of 1.5 stories, you can take advantage of the setbacks. In that case, it'd be no change from today's ordinance. If you're going to build beyond that to 2 or 2.5 stories, which we have to allow for, you have to meet the principal setbacks. So the same as for a single family home in that district.
I think that's rather ingenious.
What?
I think that's rather ingenious.
So what are the setbacks if it's not 2.5 stories?
It's half the principal building setback or 7.5, whichever is higher. So this is a case where we were more permissive than the state law. So we're matching the minimum we need to do under state law to the maximum height, but keeping our sort of more permissive setbacks for the shorter ADUs.
Question. On historic carriage houses,
Mm-hmm.
typically anywhere from 5 feet from the property line to right on the property line. Can a carriage house that's, let's say, right on the property line, have an ADU in it?
So if it's potentially, so if it is deemed, if it's found historically significant by the historical commission and it is not located in a local historic district. If it's in a local district, it cannot. You would have, you either couldn't have an ADU. If you potentially could accomplish it by special permit, as long as it's not too tall or too big, because we can't, there's no special permit allowance to go beyond the height or the size.
Okay, what about distance between occupied?
Yeah,
buildings?
we're
How does
not,
that, how would that work?
so that's only again for the historic carriage house provision. And prior to the 2022 update, the only option for a by right detached ADU was the historic carriage house. Which again, can only be outside the historic district. Because we now have the allowance for detached ADUs everywhere by right to a certain size and meeting certain setbacks, we would comply with the state law. Those provisions about the distance between buildings for the carriage house is part of that carve out that allows it to be bigger or taller or closer to the setbacks, et cetera.
For example, my carriage house is 7.5 feet from the property line. It's occupied. The carriage house next door, over 100 years old, right on the property line. Can they put an ADU in there? They were told that they could a while ago.
Probably not, but that doesn't fall under what we need to do to comply with state law.
Why could they not do it? Under what's our?
So if they're not meeting, so they possibly could if they came and got a special permit to waive the setback requirement.
But we're talking about being able to do it without special permit.
No, unless you amend that section. That's not necessary to comply with state law because we allow, state law requires us to allow internal and detached ADUs by right everywhere. Some degree that there's a single family home where you could build a single family home. And we can't restrict it more than we would a single family home. So that means we have to allow the same height. And we can't require greater setbacks than a single family home. We're doing that. The carriage house is sort of a carve out to allow more than that. You could amend it
What,
not a bad idea to amend it.
yeah, what amendment?
No, wait a
would-
minute, hang on. Let's stay with what's necessary for state law. Otherwise, we're gonna get off track here. Let her get through what we have to do to comply.
Yeah, but that's not necessary for state law.
I'll get back into this.
Could be good policy, but not necessary for state law compliance. So additional amendments that we need to make, again, as I said, one of the main ones is removing the owner occupancy requirement. This just means that each unit could be rented separately. It does not allow the units to be sold individually, so you still can't convert them to condos and sell them separately. So you still need to have one owner for the site.
That's by state law.
No, it just means we can't have an owner occupancy requirement. We can.
Right, but they have to have one owner, you said, is that by state law?
I think we're pretty confident that state law does not require us to allow condos. Which means you would have one owner of the site.
So you think that's in the state regulations?
It doesn't require us, but does it allow us?
Well, we could, sure,
Okay.
but we're not required to do it.
Okay.
So we've kept our requirement that they can't be sold individually. They can just be rented, both be rented. We also need to remove the prohibition on additional front doors for internal ADUs. And then is it
Just explain why that's required, Jim.
so the actual definition that the state wrote for ADUs talks about being accessed from. I can pull it up in a second, but it's like access from the street. Yes, maintains a separate entrance either directly from the outside or through an entry hall. So we have a requirement, and again, this is a requirement that goes beyond what we put in single family homes. Because a single family home, you can have multiple doors. There's nothing stopping you from having, multiple doors on the street. But we don't require an internal ADU to add its own door to the street. So we would need to remove that to come into compliance with both the definition and the design, unreasonable design regulations.
I thought
Wait a
it,
minute, hang on.
question
No, not yet.
on this.
I want to make sure we get through. Is this, have you got another, we've got the question of as I recall, the maintaining the owner occupancy for as of right.
Right, so we did provide an alternate draft that retained that. Again, our recommendation is that not necessary. One, we're not getting that many of these, so we think we should do whatever we can to encourage it. But also, as we speak to people and speak to, architects and people who build these and all the conversations we've had over the years about inquiries, it's mainly for family. Most people don't want people living in their backyard or in their house and don't want to be a landlord. So there are plenty of districts now where 2-family is allowed by right. And I don't know we've seen any new 2-family rental being built. That's not that attractive. If that was a lucrative option, we'd be seeing more 2-family rentals being built. We're seeing 2-family condos exclusively being built. So I don't think this actually is going to incentivize many more. So we think it should be the same requirements across the board. And if there is any particular reason to add this, it could be done as part of the special permit. But we did provide the draft.
No,
That
I
includes
just
that
want to be clear
language.
about it. Okay, so let me just summarize where we are. Now, are you done with the?
Yeah, and so there could be other things that we still need to address. Again, the regulations, we're waiting for the regulations to be finalized. I know we'd initially been hoping to hold a public hearing next month. And speaking with the law department, our latest thought is that we should wait until the regulations are finalized and we can have a clean draft that we know is addressing all of those regulations before setting a public hearing. We won't be out of compliance in any way because whatever is in, it's there on February 2nd is what's in effect. But there's still a few areas where we're still trying to work through.
Okay, I appreciate that. I just want to say we'll take questions on the content in a minute, but just this process, as I mentioned at the outset, I'm mindful that the budget is coming at us and after the budget becomes the summer, and I want to get something done here, this and the other items, so. I'd like to get this public hearing at least on the books if we have to. I think if we do it at the end of February, should have us 3 weeks to see what's been done, and then we can make the adjustments in time for that. But I don't want to hold up the train any more than that if we possibly can. So when we get done, I'm going to ask for that as a date, and then with the understanding that if everything blows apart, we can extend it, but I really want to move this forward. So, questions now, Counselor Danver, and then
Okay.
I'll recognize Counselor Albrecht.
Thank you. First of all, would you explain once more the removing the provision for the second front door?
Yeah,
I'm confused about that.
so there's 2 reasons that we need to do it.
First of all, what are we now requiring and what does the state require?
So right now, we don't allow an internal ADU to add a front
A
door.
front door.
So if there's already 2 doors or more than, 2 doors, that's okay.
And the reason for that?
Well, I think the idea was that we wanted them to be an accessory to the
Or
building
you can speak-
inside, but not make it apparent,
Yeah,
and that's.
so you could today add another front door to your house, single family home, and then come back and do an ADU.
That's right.
Cause we don't, it's one of those
The door in
restrictions
first.
that we only put on the ADUs, not on the single family
Mm-hmm.
homes. And, I see plenty of homes that have multiple front doors.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, from a sort of design perspective, I prefer one, so you know where to go. I find it confusing when there's multiple front doors, but that's besides the point.
There's a whole Halloween constituency, but
Where do you trick or treat?
yeah,
That said, the state definition, both, can't be both. The state,
requirement?
we can write that in. The state law defined ADUs as having, entry from the outside or from an internal hallway. So initially, our interpretation was we had to remove that provision based on the definition. Now with the draft regulations that say we can, regulate it more than we would a single family home, I believe we'd also need to remove that because that's not something we prohibit on any other single family home.
And one other question, you mentioned the 700 square foot maximum footprint. There are, I can think of at least one carriage house, that, is way more than 700 square foot
So
footprint.
the carriage houses can be more. So
Okay.
that's where the carriage houses have their own sort of carve out, where they're not subject to most of the other requirements.
And can they be as large as they are in
Yes.
existence?
Yes,
Okay.
you can't add on to them,
Hmm.
but they can be whatever is there. Again, if they meet those other provisions, such as the distance from with the 15 foot or whatever, or 7, whatever it is.
And if it's more than 1,500 square feet, if they can be more than 1,500 square
Yes.
feet.
So carriage houses are kind of their own thing,
Yes.
and we're not proposing any changes to those provisions.
and I think that your initial chart indicated that they've been some of the detached ADUs.
They're most of the detached
Yeah.
ADUs have been historic carriage houses. And then we have a few that have been approved by special permit, some are both, they were a carriage house and got a special permit. Maybe they're adding on or exceeding FAR. And then I think we've had maybe 1 or 2 detached non-carriage house by right ADUs that have been permitted. But the 700 square feet has been an issue even before this because there's no special permit provision to waive it. I think I don't think that was necessarily intentional, but you can ask for a larger garage footprint, so you can go beyond the 700 square feet if it's for a garage, but not if it's for an ADU. And it makes it so you can't max out the 1,500 square feet, and it makes it harder to do a one-story ADU because you can't max out that 900 square feet.
And one more
Wait a
question.
minute, I want to, you've got a colleague over here who's been waiting. Do you mind if I come back? Otherwise, I'm,
All right,
you know,
I'll-
no disrespect, but I just want to be fair. Counselor Albright and then Counselor Wright.
So I would like to talk about amendments.
Well, hang on, I want to talk about how to talk about amendments before we
Okay.
get there. Okay, but let me just get clarification on what we got.
Oh, I wanted to talk about amendments.
I know, I know.
If we do it or not, it's sort of seems to be a conversation.
Well, we will, but can we not talk about amendments until we get clarification about what we have?
Okay,
All right,
come back.
all right, I'll come back to you. Counselor Wright and then Counselor Gath.
I just wanna, clarify, so when you do an ADU, you still have to meet the other, like, open space and things like that.
Yes, and that's our interpretation is that we can still require that. I think there's a little bit of confusion out there regarding that with the regulations. Whether those are considered unreasonable, our interpretation has been, we can, and especially since they say we have to sort of regulate them like a single family home, that we can still apply open space FAR.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Gath.
Yeah, I actually, like the expansion of the footprint, even though it's, you know, it's considered an accessory. I just think of the accessibility and many people want to have, single floor living, which I think will be a very good thing. But if we go into the ordinance itself, and we're talking about removing the ownership, you know, when the ownership changes, there's the provision that's been crossed out when it changes ownership. You know, it's number 2.
Yeah.
And I'm curious because I sort of feel as if it's just asking the new owner to comply with the ordinance. So is that something that's at the state a problem, you know, in terms of that they are now, you know, owner of an accessory apartment and they sort of need to appreciate what that means, you know?
So I don't know for sure if that's an issue with the state. However, we don't require any other owners, property owners to submit regular affidavits that they comply with all city ordinances and zoning, which would essentially be what this is doing now. It was needed when you had to confirm who was living there,
Right.
because that's not a physical thing you can see, and it's not something we really do otherwise. But now that it's just, you can build to this size, right? There's no ongoing sort of use provisions. So we don't need that affidavit. It would be really unusual to have that. Because we don't say, oh, you just built a single family home, you have to comply with zoning and all the other ordinances. So every year you have to submit this affidavit. So it would be unusual to do it here.
There was
Okay.
one rationale for it, if I just interject that I recall, which is that part of our ordinance, which is very interesting, the state picked up. I think actually they borrowed, somebody was looking at Newton when they drafted the law, because the short-term rental provision was a key
Yeah.
dimension of our, because we really didn't want these becoming Airbnbs. And the idea of having the owner certify that they're complying, not just with the dimension, but that provision was really important. And so I'm cautious about doing away with that part. If there's some way we can have a less,
Yeah.
I mean, to comply with those things that are particular, because they would, the worry I have is that this is, without the owner occupancy, then you have nobody sort of required to be the supervisor, and then you've got some absentee owner, and then we're off to the races for enforcement, you know, and so if there's a way to preserve that, I would do it myself, but that's part of the rationale we did it, I think. if I
Yeah.
recall correctly.
Though you still, like for short-term rentals, it's the same with any home, like the same provisions apply to any home.
No, I understand.
Short-term rental, we're not requiring every homeowner to do it, so it would be sort of targeting just these. I also think if someone is going to illegally be doing a short-term rental, they're probably not gonna do the affidavit. We usually find out about the short-term rentals because of requests for enforcement.
Right.
Because people see a lot of cars and comes in different cars, different out-of-state license plates.
Okay,
Yeah,
let's
yeah.
finish that up,
No,
then I'll
and
come back to
I,
you.
the only thought that I'm having is that it's a change of ownership, and it would be one time, when the property actually changes hands, that you would actually, educate them about, you have an accessory apartment and you need to comply, with a whole list of, requirements in terms of having this unit. So I'm just sort of,
Yeah.
when I saw this, I thought, it's a missed opportunity. That's what I saw it as, just out of like.
I see that, but that list is still, really just the only use provision is the short-term rental. And again, we don't do this every time you buy a house. We don't require this. The requirements really are just physical now. So it's the same as, and when anything's being constructed, you're reviewing it at that time. Is it being built per, the zoning requirements? And then if they deviate from that down the road without a permit, it's, the same enforcement that we would do for anything. I understand some hesitancy in removing something like that, but I don't think we're getting anything from it.
Okay.
by
Okay,
keeping
well,
it.
it's just education. And then I have one other thing, it's with the, when we were looking at the, as I understand, and I just want to confirm this, that, in terms of the building heights, that it's actually going to be the 2.5 stories, which is 36 feet. And or with a flat roof, it's going to be.
Yes,
30.
sorry, yeah.
So that's to be expected, in the sense that, they could potentially be long and tall. Okay.
I mean,
I think
that's a consequence of the law, I'm afraid.
It is.
No, that's what
We
I'm
may
trying
not
to.
like it, but
get a
that's,
confirmation of.
Right.
Yeah.
I would say from a design perspective, I think what you'd most likely see is not a tall 2.5 story narrow ADU. You would see a garage with a 1.5 story
Yeah.
ADU above it. So that the entire structure is 2.5 stories. But the ADU is, 700 feet with a half story. That seems to be a more likely design outcome. We could speak to some architects about it, but that's what I would see.
Yeah, you're not gonna build a 900 square foot,
No,
2.5 stories.
I was
So,
trying to
yeah,
That's a
visualize.
Yes.
400 square foot footprint with 2.5
Yeah.
stories.
be like one of these towers they train firefighters on, right?
Yes.
It could be.
I'm going to recognize Councilor Wright and then come back to Councilor Dan.
So this Airbnb is an issue in Ward 3 and enforcement is like impossible. So I like the idea if 100 houses get sold, I don't know how many houses per year, that everyone gets it. And this is another thing that they could go after for enforcement for Airbnb and not just for this. It's a sheet of paper that they need to fill out with ISD when you're, or whoever, when you're buying a house.
Yeah, I refer to law on that because I don't think we require people to come into ISD when they,
Or
Buy a house.
actually having this sheet of paper. It's informational mostly, but they
Sure.
could sign it, that they understand it. And maybe this would be another lever to going after it, because it is really, really, really difficult to stop the illegal Airbnbs, and whatever tools we can use, I think would be helpful. The other question is, we have what we're allowing, 2.5 stories, 36 feet, but in MRT, we have different dimensions. So they have to do our normal,
dimensions, because
Okay.
the way it's written is, it's what would be allowed for a single family home.
Okay.
MRT doesn't
Yes.
allow single family homes.
okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilor Denver, and I haven't forgotten you, Councilor.
Thank you. On the topic of the short-term rentals, again, I entirely agree that this is a problem. It's a problem in Newton, and it's a huge problem on the Cape and Islands, where single-family homes are being bought up by corporations that buy single-family homes, and they rent them out. They take them out of circulation for people that need long-term rentals. However, for example, if you have an older person who goes into who lives in a house that has an ADU, the ADU is rented, the person goes into a nursing home. the house is no longer owner occupied. What happens to that person in the ADU? And can the family who, let's say, doesn't have a person that can go in and occupy the main unit, what happens in a circumstance like that? So I'm not sure that we got it worded the way it needs to be worded.
Well, we're removing the owner, so there's two separate things here. There's the owner occupancy requirement, which would require the property owner or one of the property owners to live on site in one of the units, which seems to be the example
Right.
you're.
Yep.
That's being removed at a bare minimum for ADUs that are under the by right threshold. The short-term rental is a separate thing. That's when you're looking to rent for less than 30 days. And we're not proposing any changes to the short-term rental ordinance. And the state law does not require us to allow ADUs to be short-term rentals. So we've always prohibited them as short-term rentals. This draft would continue that, but you would no longer, in your example, where the owner
Occupant has to leave.
the family could rent that unit to someone else.
They can.
Yeah.
And is that in a special provision? Do we
It's just that
describe that?
we're removing the requirement that someone lived there.
I see. Okay,
So your example would be taken care of.
okay, that's good.
So, any questions on the proposal? Again, just on the proposal, my preference is to retain the owner occupancy for things above, because I still think it's a wise provision. But, that's obviously for the committee and the council to decide. So the question about other things that are not required. Now, the item, as it says, for what is required. And so if you got some things that are not required that you want to
Yes.
consider?
Because, so, I mean, as Ms. Kyra pointed out, we don't have that many ADUs. We've been doing this for a very long time. We don't have very many. And the big batch of them that came in 2018, something like that, really had a lot to do with a lot of illegal accessory apartments that became legalized when we changed the rules at that point. So we're not getting very many. And I think there are some simple amendments that we could add, that we could discuss, that might make it a little bit more flexible to have these ADUs. And the reason why I'd like to do it now is that we probably won't come back to it again in this term. This is going to be our chance to do ADUs this year.
Well,
And I would like to just go through the list and see if there's any support for some of these.
well, before you do, let me just see if the committee, I want to see if there's appetite to do that. I mean, the item doesn't admit it. If there is appetite to do it, then what I would recommend is we docket a parallel item, a parens 2. So we'll have those as a separate thing, because we've got an item before us we can send to public hearing, and we could send the second thing to public hearing with it. But I'd rather not get into a discussion on things that haven't been part of the packet and part of the notice that we've had for this meeting, on a substantive matter. I mean, we could talk about the process to do it, and I'll save time at the next meeting for you to explain them if we do that. But let's just see if there's sentiment in the committee to do more than what we've got. If there is, that's just a general threshold question. If there isn't, then it doesn't mean you can't docket something, but I do want to not have what additional opportunities might exist, and we can agree or disagree about the value of them. Cloud the opportunity to get this piece done soon.
So I'm not sure exactly what you're proposing. Are you proposing?
Well, let me just get a sense of the committee, and I'll find out from people, right?
I agree that we should.
You would
Talk
agree
about-
with Council,
yes.
right? Council, right?
So I'd like to just get this through now and do a separate docket item, and talk about those. I have another item though I want clarification is,
Before you get there, let me just clarify this
Okay.
piece.
Yeah.
Council
I
Gill?
would like a comment too, because I feel as if, there's enough in this right now that we're considering. And I like the focus in that we're trying to reach compliance, and so I would much rather just sort of focus on that. Get that through the public hearing but then have a parallel track for these other Because they may need to be fleshed out more. I don't know what they are.
Well, and again, because of the notice problem, Councilor Gallo.
I agree with yourself and Counselors Getz and Wright. What I heard is, we're not entirely sure what the state's requiring of us here, you know, open space was a question, and some other things. I personally would prefer us to get through those items as gracefully as we can. Even if there's a couple bumps in the road, that's fine. I also believe that there are items that, as a committee, we still have open, that I still want us to get back to before we even take up additional amendments to ADUs. And I believe you mentioned them earlier in this meeting. We still have at least 3 items that we have not disposed of that I believe are equally, if not more important than amendments to ADU ordinances. And it just seems to me like we've been kicking these things down the road for, in some cases, almost a year now. I would prefer to deal with those before any new amendments to the ADU.
Okay, let me just see, Councilor Krinsman and Councilor Kalis. You have any views?
Yeah. So, I don't know what the,
Yeah, both of them do, so let me recognize Councilor Krinsman first.
I think as long as we've got,
I hear you.
Yeah, loud, turn it up.
as long as we've got the ordinance open, why not?
Still inaudible, I'm sorry.
How about now?
Barely.
Really?
Yeah, now you got it.
Well, I'm gonna shout then, just to say that as long as we've got the ordinance open, we might as well address all of the amendments that folks are interested in making. It's not, we have a lot to do. So as long as we've got something open, I think we ought to address the amendments from Councilor Albright.
Okay, Councilor Kalis.
so ADUs is all about affordable housing, right? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Am I yelling to you?
I don't agree, but that doesn't matter.
Okay, so to me, it is very important. I'm speaking to Councilor Oliver. I think this is a real opportunity for us. So I'd at least like to hear what those amendments are.
Well, the question, I'm not saying we can't, I just want to find out where the committee is, and so let me indicate what I think is an appropriate response. I would like to get this item set for public hearing, and then I would recommend the committee create a parens 2 for additional amendments, and we take those up at the next meeting so you can explain them. But I would rather not take up this meeting's time tonight to get into those details. I'd like to get us moving forward on this, if you're agreeable to that. And then, because if we do a parens 2, it can be part of the report, it'll be docketed at the next council meeting, so will be available to us to have you present them. Now, what happens to them is another question, right?
Right.
And understood. And we still have a public hearing, but I'd like to get the item, and we could put both items could end up on the same public hearing night because it'd be late in
Okay,
February.
that sounds very.
Does that sound
Yeah.
reasonable? But I don't want to try and discuss the new items tonight, if we can avoid that, if you agreeable.
Fine.
Councilor Wright?
So one item which a couple people have written to us that seems a little bit of a issue that might need to be cleaned up to do this is the number of individuals living on a property.
Yeah.
And with ADUs.
Well, let's not get into that tonight, because that's a separate issue.
And that's one of my.
That's one of-
Right.
Well, that might with the state.
Yeah, I think
That'd be
that
a problem
might
with the
be
state.
something for the state law, because I did see that the association of persons, so we don't allow more than 4 unrelated people living together without requiring a special permit. Our ADU ordinance does say that the max number of people is across both units, is whatever it would be for the principal unit. So I think we may have an issue there. I did reach out to Ms. Wilson and Mr. Lee in the law department today, asking, if we could discuss that a bit more.
Well, why don't we
So-
hold that? Let me just indicate that historically, that particular item, this is background, was subject to the famous Supreme Court case a long time ago, which basically upheld an ordinance that said more than 3 unrelated people living together was a permissible restriction. And I can just tell you that the complaints you hear about in your ward in my ward, it's the overstuffed units where the students are more than 3 people are occupying in that circumstance. So it's been an important part of the toolkit. So, but that's for a conversation for another day.
But the question here is, you have 2 separate units and you're combining it. I mean, I can still see keeping it 4 people,
Right.
but now you can have 8. because
Well,
you
it
have
may be
2
that that's an
separate
adjustment that,
Yes.
that needs to be made.
Yeah,
But
we need to
I'm
better
gonna,
understand
I'm gonna
that.
suggest that again be, unless it becomes part of the state requirement, again, the first item is what's the requirement of the state law? And what I'm hearing is that there's things that as a matter of policy, you would like to include in an additional set of amendments because of the timing. So what I'm going to suggest is that we vote to create a parens to for potential additional amendments. I'll work with the language with the clerk so that something will be broad enough to pick it up. And then, but set down at least the main item for public hearing, because I can do that now. The other item hadn't been docketed yet. But we can deal with it at the next meeting.
Are you talking about actually docketing something or just?
No, it'll be
creating-
docketed through the vote of the committee.
Okay.
All right,
Yeah.
so as I've checked with the clerk and my understanding is that the report, if we create the Friends 2 on Monday night or Tuesday night, will effectively put that piece of the puzzle in front of us. So we can take it up at the next zoning and planning meeting, okay, and then you can explain it. And then we have public hearing at a later date, not, at the end of
Well, it'd be
February.
nice to do it, I mean, if possible, to do it at the same time rather than 2 public hearings, but.
No,
we'll see.
I'm talking about trying to maybe do both public hearings at the
Okay.
same time.
Okay,
Okay, but I think the discussion needs to happen before the public hearing,
sure.
right? So what I'm talking about is giving you an opportunity at the next meeting, but not doing it tonight because you haven't had a chance to put anything in writing or to talk about it.
So does that mean we wouldn't set the public hearing?
No, we
until-
set the public hearing on this now,
But far enough
In
away.
training.
to-
far enough away
Okay.
that
yeah.
you can also set another public hearing for the
Fine.
second piece, okay? Yeah. My.
Counselor
oh,
Krinsman.
Counselor Krinsman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just curious, would it be possible, and this might be a question for Ms. Wilson, but I think it would be fair to Counselor Albright if we made the wording for the public hearing expansive enough to include the potential amendments that we address at our next meeting?
Well,
We don't have scheduled 2 separate public hearings?
I'm not prepared to do that yet. We will have that opportunity, I think, next meeting, right, Ms. Gordon? Won't we have time to adjust the language of a public hearing by the next meeting? We set the public hearing for later in February.
We would be setting the public hearing for the second meeting in February, which would give us time to adjust public hearing language to be inclusive of amendments proposed at the next meeting.
So I'm trying to set a process so that we're not precluding anything, but just giving an orderly conversation. So,
No, I agree. I just want to make sure that the Counselor Albright's amendments aren't precluded from taking place at the same public hearing that we're going to call for tonight, which I think is fair.
we may have to make an adjustment to the language to do that, but right now, all I can advertise or ask for advertising is the docket item we have, because we don't have the other one before us. So,
Okay.
but I don't see it a problem,
Okay, fair compromise. Thank you.
okay? So, I would entertain a motion to hold the item, but to set a public hearing on it for the second meeting in February. Right,
So moved.
24th, I've got.
24th,
Mhm.
all right, all those in favor will say aye.
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 Opposed, abstained, okay, and this give you a chance to put something together for the next meeting.
Okay,
Now,
maybe I can, planning department, put this language. to these.
well, we'll work with and get language just to generally say additional amendments in addition to what's required to comply with state law. Something like that, so that gives you a broad umbrella, and then you can come in with what you want, okay? I may not be persuaded by it, but I'll give you a chance to say it.
It's fair.
Is that fair enough? Okay, all right, now, back to, the, VC.
Mhm.
Next item is, I have to actually read it, sorry. This is quarterly update on projects using the VC overlay district. And, the update should include indications of interest and actual permits filed for which villages under which zoning districts and number of stores and units. And this is item 4324. So who's on deck for this one?
That would be me.
Okay, Ms. Kyra, thank you.
Yeah, give me 1 second because my Adobe just decided to stop working. So I just need to pull up the original. So this is, the docket item was, I believe, a quarterly sort of check-in on what's happening in the VCOD. Given that it's now been in effect for a year, this would be a sort of year in review, look back. This has been on the books, since the end of December 2023. So this is everything that has happened since then. Thank you. So just quickly, in the approved Village Center Overlay District, there were 963 parcels, and as calculated by the state, Office of Housing and Livable Communities, a capacity of 8,399 units. So far, what we have seen is 5 parcels opting in, 3 of those residential, 2 of those commercial. We have had 1 housing unit created, 8 are in the permitting pipeline currently, and then there's an additional, don't actually think it's 43 anymore, I think it's less than that, units that are out there conceptually. And I'll go through each of these in a bit more detail.
Just a clarification, sorry. 5 parcels, so that's before they subdivide. What would be interesting is 5 parcels, but ended up at 7 parcels. I know 2 of them subdivided.
That's with the subdivision.
Okay, so the 5 parcels is
Yeah.
with subdivision, okay.
Okay, so this was actually the first project to get permitted. It's in Newtonville, 424 Newtonville Avenue. It's an existing circa 1908 3-family home that was converted to 4 units. So this is MRT, they took advantage of the adaptive reuse to add an additional unit. There was no addition to the building. There was some, minor site work, minimal exterior work, but otherwise it was fully contained inside. So that's our 1 unit that has been fully created as a certificate of occupancy has been issued there. So next, this is a project I think people are most familiar with, 4749 Chase Street in Newton Center, again, MRT district. This time it's new construction. This is our first new construction project to go through permitting. So this was a 17,000 square foot lot that had an existing 2-family home, I think maybe 1960s home that was split into 2 lots. And each lot will construct a new 4-unit building. Each building is about 5,700 square feet, 2 units at about 1,500 square feet, 2 units at 1,350. And because they're doing both of these at the same time, side by side, it triggers our inclusionary zoning ordinance, which kicks in at 7 units. So they have elected, they could pay into the fund. They've elected to provide 1 deed restricted unit. That would be permanently affordable at 80% AMI. And these are intended to be rental units. So building permits have been issued for this. So currently, I'm not sure where they are with construction, if they've really started, but they do have their permits.
The
Lots
cement has been poured,
Okay,
and they're actively
Where
working.
is this related to you?
It's right across the street.
and so those are our 2 or 3, I guess, residential projects that are permitted or going through permitting. And so those are the 3 that parcels have opted in. The other 2 that have opted in are commercial parcels. So the first one is in Newton Center, 749, 759 Beacon. This is where there's Coconut Newton, the ramen place. Here, the jewelry, Sycamore, Bills, and Makey. So they opted in to have some flexibility in adding seating. They weren't doing any other exterior work, no additions or anything like that. No new businesses coming in, but this gave them some more flexibility around seating because they wouldn't be subject to parking requirements and otherwise would have needed to come get a special permit for a parking waiver.
So there's no housing associated?
No housing associated with this.
Hmm.
So they are now subject to the VC2 zoning. So they no longer have the option of the underlying business zone. They have opted in fully to the VC2 zone. So any work that happens in the future here will need to be fully compliant. But right now, there's no housing. It just allowed them to not have to provide or not need to get a waiver for parking to add seating.
And when you say fully compliant, you mean with VC2?
So this is similar example, the Rock's Diner, which moved in to Newton Highlands, and also VC2. Again, no exterior work, but allowed for additional seats to be provided. And potentially additional staff, because we also tie parking requirements to the number of staff. And a certificate of occupancy also issued here. And then finally, what would be the biggest project to date is at 19 Highland Street, the Suite of Orleans Church, right behind 28 Austin Street along Graham Way, across from the new Cooper Center. So this has not submitted any permits yet, but they have been going through the Newton Historical Commission for review because it is a local landmark. So the entire site is subject to landmark review. This is a VC3 project. I'm looking to preserve the existing church and convert it to, right now they're saying 6 units, and then add an additional multifamily building to the rear. The last thing we saw with a unit count had 37 units in the new building. My understanding is it may be less than that. That number is probably going down. And this is right now under review at NHC. They got feedback on the church, which was positive, and they need to come back with the more detailed plans for the new construction building. And I'm not sure when exactly that will happen, at which point they'll need building permit and probably site plan review, because it looks like they're dividing the site into 2 parcels. So those are our examples of permitted or pending projects. So just doing a sort of analysis of what's coming through in the BCOD versus the underlying zoning. We've seen 5 properties in 2024 submit for engineering site plan permits that at least checked off in the permit that they're in the BCOD. All of those were zoned MR1/MRT. Of those, just the one, 4749 Chase, that will now be 2 parcels, chose to opt in to the BCOD. So we were curious what might be driving the more of those to go with the underlying zoning. So we have had conversations with engineering to get some more feedback on what they're hearing and their conversations, because they're really the first ones that will see these by right projects. So the other 4 chose to do a new single or 2-family home in the MR1 zoning. General feedback has been, I think partially this is still somewhat new. Some of these projects may have already been underway that were, being built to the MR1 zone. The hearing concerns about being a first mover on this, so a lot of people don't want to be the first one to do it. Concerns given the controversy surrounding the zoning, I guess some are reluctant to utilize it. They want to be a good neighbor and think, this is, people don't want to see this. The additional challenge of just understanding new zoning, it is different than our existing zoning. A lot of the builders know the MR zones well. They have that down. And then that on top of new regulations is, I think, challenging. So, changes to stormwater and trees and electrification and building codes and all of that, plus and height and retaining walls, and then whole new zoning, maybe overwhelming. And then in a lot of cases, it's just more, feasible or more lucrative to build the, big single family or 2-unit condos in the underlying zoning. So we'll continue to analyze this, get feedback, like to debrief with the folks who have already gone through it and understand, you know, their decision-making process and any feedback they have. But we'll, again, continue to monitor what's happening and what's not happening. So some future considerations. These are just some things that have come up in the conversations we had. One is allowing a bit more flexibility for carriage houses. I know we were talking about carriage houses with ADUs. What we're hearing is the adaptive reuse in some ways disincentivizes preserving the carriage house. So the way the MRT is written is you have to have, or BCOD in general, at least 3 units in the building. So I think we're requiring 3 units in the main, at least 3 units in the main building. And then if you preserve the carriage house and turn it into housing, we're requiring at least 3 units in the carriage house, which doesn't make a lot of sense.
No, it doesn't make sense.
And no one's doing. So we think there's maybe something even short term we might want to address here, where you can build fewer units on the site that incentivizes preservation of the carriage house. The other one is just keeping an eye on the MRT new construction footprint. You know, this was something flagged by the state to keep an eye on. You know, is this enough? 4749 Chase seems to be making it work. But again, just to sort of look at whether having a small increase in that footprint helps shift the decision-making process with the underlying zoning. And
Okay,
then,
there's just, I think, point of clarification. Councilor Wright, did you want to?
So, well, just there, the footprint, so Chase is 5,700, so if they did 3 units, that's 1,900 square feet per unit. And the whole idea is we want smaller units, not huge units, so I don't think increasing the footprint is what we want to do. I was wondering, what are the 4 addresses of the, I know Braylon was one that opted not to go through.
I can give you those. I have them in a spreadsheet somewhere.
Okay.
So I just pulled a report of the site plan review applications in engineering and those that checked off their BCOD.
Okay, and there's other ones potentially coming down the pipeline, like 723 Washington Street, which they want to do, well, they're selling it. And
Yeah, I know they had plans and they're selling it, so
37
someone
units.
might.
127 units per acre density, and then, you know, 192 to 200 Sumner, you know, that was bought up all by, there's 3 property there. They bought up all 3 of them and they're going for a tear down for all 3. So I don't know what the plan is, but that's right in the area, so I expect something to happen there too.
Yeah, we haven't had conversations with that one. I only included those that have actually started some sort of process. We get a lot of inquiries, but then not much comes of it.
So before go on to the next, there's a hand raised, and I want to make sure I identify the owner of the hand.
Councilor Lucas.
Thank you. Councilor Lucas, not someone else.
This, Chair Baker, this is not Counselor Gentile, okay?
Okay, good.
All right, thank you, Ms. Kyra, for the presentation, and just a brief follow-up on what counts.
If she's going to finish up, do you want to wait, or does it pertain to this item? I just want to be clear. I mean, something she said, do you want a clarification?
Yes, I would. It can wait until she's done. I thought she was done.
Oh, I think she's got just a few more slides, if you don't mind.
I just have one more, and I don't think we really even need, I think we already covered it previously. It was just a status sort of update with the SJC ruling. So I think we already talked about that. We're expecting new regulations to be promulgated. That's all.
Okay, all right, excuse me. Now, Councilor Lucas again.
All right, thank you. Again, thank you once again, Ms. Kyra, for the presentation and the work going into this. Just 2 things to follow up on what Councilor Wright said. If you could just keep the Ward 2 councilors in the loop with respect to 721, 723 Washington Street. And then the other thing was had to do with Chase Street. It was something that you said, and I just want to follow up on it. They are building 8 units, and you said that one of them is gonna be an affordable unit, I presume, at 80 AMI. But you said something that the property owner had the option to pay, I think you said had the option to pay into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund instead of providing the affordable unit. I'm asking here, I thought that had to go through the land use committee to do the cash payment in lieu of the housing, no?
No, so if you're doing 7 to 9 units, you can do the cash payment by right. And it's a proportional payment. It's not the cost of a full unit. If you're doing more than 9 units, then you do have to come through city council for a special permit to do a cash payment.
So if you're doing 7 to 9, this is 8, they would have only been required to make a fractional payment instead of providing a full unit. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I mean, it would be, I think, 80% of what the cost is, but they chose to provide the unit on site.
Okay, is this, forgive me, is this in our inclusionary zoning, or is this something special with the state and the BCOD? I'm a little confused on this one.
Our inclusionary zoning.
Interesting. Okay, because I thought because I'm thinking of the Walker Center that we had in land use this term last year.
There were 16
Exactly, that was 16, and that required a special permit.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So 7 to 9 units, it's by right. River Street did their payment by right. And Walker had to ask for a special permit because they were more than 9 units.
I'm sorry, what is River Street?
So you also had a special permit project on River Street that was also Civico. They then chose to do the cash payment, which they can do by right.
Cherry and River,
I thought it was Elm and River.
or maybe it's Elm, yes, Elm.
So that one they did,
Those are condos too.
yeah, I know, we're not getting into the whole BCOD right now. I can take this offline, but thank you very much for answering my questions. I'm all set, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, questions, Councilor Albright?
This is not on topic, but I forgot to ask you something before. It's the 700 square feet that you're taking.
Wait a minute.
Let me say this before I forget it. It's in another section.
It's in the
mentioned in
accessory.
section 3. So
Yes,
when
in the
you take it out
accessory
of
building.
Section 3.
Yeah, so we would put in we wouldn't take it out of section 3, we would put it in section 6.7.1, that it's not
Okay.
subject to that.
Okay, all right, good, thank you.
You still have 700 square feet per garage.
Yes,
Yeah,
but
you're not doing away
there's
with
an
that.
ADU sentence in there, so
Yeah,
it's got to
no.
get rid of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, thank you.
That's all right. I mean, I just want to make sure. Okay, questions for the department? I guess I have one, which is, there are obviously things being built outside of the district, right? And so we've given people a sandbox, and then there's another sandbox that they can play in, and they're choosing one over the other. Do you have a sense? You said a little bit about the economics or
So you're talking about roughly the people that are using the underlying zoning but have the option.
Yeah.
To use MRT. So I mean, I think 4749 Chase was able to split the lot and do 2 buildings. And we showed from the get-go that the economics are at the MR zoning and what it allows square footage wise is larger and more lucrative and a known quantity. Now, changing how height is measured and original grade, that's going to impact all of that. I mean, to Councilor Wright's point about, sizing of units, these are in the 1,1500, 1,900 square foot. The MR average is in like the 4,000 square foot range. So these are significantly smaller units that are typically being seen in the same geographies.
Yeah.
And so construction costs, et cetera, timing, known quantities, doing 3 to 4 smaller units doesn't outperform 2 really big units.
Well, I raised this question because I do seem to recall back when we passed the BCOD, there was a conversation about why we might need to adjust the MR as a right, because it was still too juicy,
Sure.
for one of a better adjective. And the question is, you know, you're talking about adjustments to the VCOD. I mean, this may not be elsewhere, but I do think it may be part of the continuing conversation here. Because there's a lot of effort gone into getting these smaller units, and we're just getting big guys.
Right.
Again, that's not what we intended.
I was gonna just say, it might be similar to what we were just talking about, it might be a yes and situation. Where one of the other things I know we've heard from this committee and others is providing family size units. And so if you slightly increase the MRT footprint to allow for 1,900 square feet, 2,000 square feet, you start to get to a more legitimate family size unit. And then if you also look at MR, you can do both.
And I'd like to have conversations with the builders who've gone through the process, who have both built under the VCOD zoning as well as those who haven't, and better understand the decision-making as well.
Yeah, so, but that's why this is a quarterly update.
Right.
Okay. Councilor Wright.
So I have a friend in an architectural firm, and she says, you know, now that a lot of these towns are passing these laws, they're seeing a lot more people coming in, and these are more bigger projects, not so much the 3 and 4, but the 10 or 12 or 20, and their business is picking up quite a bit. But it's just general in the Boston area, not specific to Newton, but they're seeing, you know, 6 months ago, there was nothing with this, and now it's really picking up.
Oh, well, that's interesting, even with the interest rates where they are. Okay. All right, and Councilor Oliver.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of follow up on a point Councilor Baker just made, I think it is really important, at least from my perspective, to understand exactly what we were just talking about, the difference between where the VCOD is available to property owner 1, 2, 3. When are they opting into the underlying, when are they opting into the VCOD? Because that, to me, we have to understand both stories before we can even hope to, you know, make any modifications that are gonna, you know, I'm gonna use the subjective term, improve what we're getting on the ground, and then we can hash out what we think the right balance is. But yeah, I think this is a great start. This is really interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the other, what did we say, 4 properties that opted out or opted into the underlying. Yeah.
Chose not to opt in.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Okay, anybody else? Anybody on the committee, Councilor Kalis, Councilor Chrisman?
All good.
Okay, all right, and so I think this is very helpful. This is a continuing item, so I think a motion to hold is appropriate. Okay, Councilor Albright, move hold.
Sorry, Josh.
Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Okay, the ayes have it. Thank you. I think that was a very helpful, you know, just snapshot. It doesn't, we're not sure what we do yet, but there's the monitoring is, this is part of what we asked for originally, and I think it's good to see that being done. Applause. You don't get often applause. You might as well grab some.
Wherever we got it.
Another year that we,
Yeah.
I would feel like we've learned something more, because it's still kind of early.
These projects take time, like they're in the works for a little while before we see anything, so I think you're right, in another year we'll know more.
Yeah, there are times these things. You know. All right, I think that concludes our agenda unless, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Councilor Brinsman?
I would move to adjourn.
Thank you very much. Motion to adjourn, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Thank you very much. Thank you one and all. Thank you those who are attending.
Thank you.
And Mr. Kidd, thank you for sticking around.
That's